Hi, welcome to Psychology Matters. I'm so fortunate, we are fortunate to have Mr. Don Redden here with us today. And Don, may I call you Don?
You
I'm
certainly
Dianne.
can.
So you work with an agency that works with those folks who are dealing with intellectual disabilities. Is that right?
That's right. Intellectual and developmental disabilities.
And developmental,
Right.
okay. So, and what is that agency?
It's Developmental Services of Dickson County.
So you came a ways to come here to Nashville today,
Well,
didn't you?
It's fairly close. So.
Yeah. So I wonder if you could break that down, because not all of us are accustomed to that language or might understand what that really means. So can you talk a little bit about what an intellectual disability is?
Sure. Let me start with a developmental disability, which is
Okay.
basically a disability that occurs prior to age 22. It means that you've got a deficit in at least 3 developmental areas. Could be
Okay.
speech, it could be physical abilities, it could be employment.
Oh, even employment.
Right, that's
Okay.
with an intellectual disability, it is a developmental disability, but there are a couple of additional stipulations. One, it has to occur before age 18 in Tennessee law, and also it has to include a measured intelligence that's below 70. So it
Okay.
includes a psychological test.
Okay.
So
So I would imagine that, so you're the director, right?
I am.
You're the director. So you have different folks that are mental health professionals working there, helping you, assisting you in working with families or people with this issue?
Well, I wouldn't call it mental health professionals.
Okay.
Maybe we can talk a little about
Sure,
that later.
sure.
But a lot of our staff, the majority of our staff, and we have about 300 or 280 staff that work with the agency. Many of them have degrees, many don't. The majority of the people are people who work directly with people supported in their homes, in the community. We call them direct support professionals.
Got you.
So.
So they're not dealing with those aspects where they would have to have that kind of degree anyway. They're
Right.
working with them in specific, in their functioning, you know, and being able to make things easier,
Right.
right? Is that right?
And sometimes it's really custodial care. I mean, some of the
Right.
individuals have significant disabilities. They really need help in everything they do.
Got you.
So, and it's really a broad spectrum of supports that people require.
Okay, so I'm curious to know, how does a person decide, find this kind of, this amazing service that's available to people who would benefit from knowing? How do they find you, or how do they end up coming into your agency?
Well, really it begins at birth. There's
Okay.
a program in Tennessee called the Tennessee Early Intervention Service, which identifies children through medical referrals and so forth at birth, if the disability is apparent at birth. So really within the first 3 years, there are services that are available to any child and family through that program. That's something that we do in several counties in Middle Tennessee, an early intervention
Is
service.
that something the hospital or the doctor
They-
first picks up on
they
and makes
could.
the connection?
They could. Often we don't know there's a disability at birth. Often it
Okay.
appears first when language is delayed, and
Right.
usually that'll occur around the 2nd year. So that first piece goes from birth to age 3. And then at age 3, many children are eligible for public education. So they would go into special education in the school system and really can stay in that school program until they're 22 or through the 22nd year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
So once they're in, then they're in until then.
yeah. And it really depends on the severity of the disability. Some
Right.
kids would graduate, may have some disability, but they would graduate at 18 or with their class. Other kids with more significant disabilities tend to stay in school through their 22nd year.
Oh, okay. Okay.
At that point, well, there are a lot of kids or adults with disabilities in Tennessee. In the past, they would have moved to a waiting list of some 8,000 people.
Oh.
but we have a new program that's come in now, and so some of the people are able to move directly from school to work, either with support through, there are other programs as well. The new program that I reference is called Employment and Community First, ECF Choices. It's a TennCare funded program. It operates through the managed care organizations like many of the other TennCare services. Just began in July of last year, so we're in the infancy, and but there's supposed to be 1,700 people served in that program this year, which we had sort of come to the point that no one was getting services before. Some of these services can be very expensive, and a lot of that's based on litigation that we've had in the state in the past. It's driven up the cost of services, and the new services are trying to work without that litigation memory, and the services are a lot less. They're less expensive, and we expect to serve more people over time in those programs.
So this is such a great thing, such a great service that's available. I wonder how many people, how many of our viewers are wondering what qualifies them for these kinds of services. So I wonder if we could break it down like pretty basically, like, you know, if you are noticing this or this or this, like, not that we could come up with an entire list, but the sorts of things that your services would be involved with.
Well, with adults it's pretty easy because most of the time people have been involved in special education at some point through their educational years, and so some people need a little support, some people need a lot of support. The effort more recently has really been to get people jobs. People with disabilities can work and are very good workers in many cases. They come to work on time, they come every day. If you look at all the things that we see with teenagers that might be a negative, people with disabilities often don't have some of those same constraints.
So it seems like, you know, what you're saying is they're different. They have different abilities. You know, maybe they have one of these things that they're dealing with and they're not able to operate in one area, but you help them find where they can operate.
Well, that's certainly the attempt, and if, you know, language is often a problem with people with intellectual disabilities, and you know, they're not going to be telephone operators, but nobody else is now either. So we see that people can work, and like I say, a lot of the effort now is to help people to get in jobs not that pay just minimum wage, but pay more than that. And we had a lady that we actually got a job for a number of years ago. She worked at a fast food restaurant, and after 3 years she was the trainer. She was training the new employees how to do that particular job. And you could always tell when she was working because you could get through the drive-in.
So much faster.
Easy. Yes. If she wasn't there, it was always backed up.
Yeah, so she took her job pretty seriously.
She did, and did a very good job.
So when we think about intellectual disabilities, are we talking about people who have a different, maybe their processor works differently and doesn't operate at the same pace that maybe we might normally think, how maybe you or I, sometimes I worry about my own processor, but how that operates, and yet they can be so adept, so able to do other things, and being able to tap into those things. Do you find yourself, your agency, working in that area?
Sure, you try to look at people's strengths, and everybody has strengths, and we all have weaknesses, and you know, we all have some disabilities. You know, I can't see very well without my glasses, so I think you look at what the strengths are for the person, and really, what are they interested in?
Yes.
You know, we used to didn't ask people a lot what they wanted to do, but
that's such a good point.
Yeah, it's very different now, and people control their own lives to a much greater extent than they did in the past. you know, we'd talked a little earlier about the term mental retardation, and
Right.
we don't use that term anymore.
Right.
In fact, it's not in Tennessee code, it's not in
Right.
the federal laws anymore. And the reason that we don't use that is people with mental retardation at the time told us, don't call me retarded.
Yeah.
It has become a derogatory term. You know, if you look back in history, idiot, imbecile, moron, those are all scientific terms for a level of intellectual disability. They all became derogatory terms, so we stopped using them, and now we've moved on with the other. You know, there are a lot of jokes about it, but usually that's from people who don't know a person
just
with a
don't know.
disability or an intellectual disability. I think when you have a family member or you have a neighbor, and for a number of years in the past, kids didn't go to school. They didn't go to school with other kids, and if they did go to school, they were in the segregated school. They're not anymore. They're
Yeah.
included in regular classes, and you know, they work to the best of their ability in what they do. So
if I had a family member entering into adulthood, and I move into where you are, into Dickson County, and this family member needs services, what do I do first? How do I know how to get into the program?
well, and we have that happen every
Do you?
day.
Okay.
And right now, for the new program, the best thing is to go to the it's www.tn/DIDD. That's the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities website. And the first thing you see when you pull that up is a banner that talks about employment and community first application. So you can do an application, self-application online, and that's the start of the process.
And then someone contacts.
Someone would contact the
me.
person.
Okay.
If the person has TennCare and has either Blue Care or AmeriGroup, which are two of the MCOs, then they will contact the person. Otherwise, it'll be the state that'll actually make the contact.
Sounds like a big job what you have. What's the most challenging part?
Well, I think the challenging part is always having enough money,
Yeah.
you know, to operate the program.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we worry about those things. Right now in Tennessee, at least in Middle Tennessee, we're pretty much at full employment. So it's hard to get those DSPs that or direct support professionals that we would like to have.
Right. How many people are employed in your agency?
We have about 285 people.
Wow.
But in the majority of them are the direct support professionals. So that's the entry-level job. You know, we want to be able to pay those folks a wage that allows them to earn a living and work with people with disabilities. It's not a job for everybody, but it can be an extremely rewarding job for folks who, you know, stay with it.
So I'm wondering this. Do you sometimes have people that enter into the program that didn't start out with a developmental disorder, but maybe they get it through, maybe that happens as a result of an accident or a veteran returning home?
In these programs, it has to happen before age 22.
Okay.
So if there's something happened later in life, now there are some supports for individuals who may have a disability resulting from something later in life, but the primary programs that we operate requires that developmental disability.
So if you were 17 and you had an accident and maybe head injury, and that's impacted this person's ability to do things that he or she could have done before,
Right.
that would be a fit.
Right.
Okay.
It would, and you know, those tragic accidents do occur.
Right.
We still have kids. We used to have more kids diving into lime quarries than we do now.
Yeah. Or
stone
swimming
quarries.
pool accidents.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it still occurs, and we don't have the medical technology to correct those issues, so that person may need lifelong support of some type.
Right, right. but you would be able to help someone who's already had that and now they're trying to get back into the world, find a fit, you know, for how they can function, whether it be employment or other. You're there for those folks.
Right.
As long as they meet that criteria.
And what we want to be able to do is to help them make their way in life and not be there all the time supporting them. A lot of the people in the past have received 24-hour support, and we find a lot of people don't need it and don't want it. Sometimes the funding requires that you provide it, whether the person needs it or not. We're undoing some of that, though, I think. But the new service, the ECF services, really don't, the focus is on employment, getting a job, and then backing off and letting that person enjoy their lives. Doesn't always happen exactly that way. I mean, there are some people who are going to need lifelong support. It's the nature of the disability. And, you know, we may not have a program that meets those needs yet, but it's still developing.
So, forgive me because I really don't know the answer to this. Sometimes I ask questions I think I know the answer to, but I really don't know this. Would you ever have the need to also help people understand their disability, you know, some sort of a, maybe not the same kind of counselors that someone would go to regularly, but a person that can sit down and talk to them and or family about what that disability is? Do you have those folks?
We don't do a lot of that. You know, the traditional talk therapy doesn't really work with a lot of people who have limited language skills. So that's not really been a big part of it. I'll tell you that we talked before about mental health. That's one of the areas that we have really the poorest supports for people. We find that between 35 and 40% of people with an intellectual disability also have a diagnosed mental health issue. Because they don't verbalize in many cases, it's much more difficult to treat them. They end up with
hard to know it unless you're there with them anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's exhibited by acting out behavior issues. We tend to treat it with psychotropic medication. Not necessarily the best approach, but sometimes the only approach that people recognize. So we really have a long way to go in that arena. There are some specialists that work with people with intellectual disabilities in the mental health field, but they're far too limited.
Yes.
Of course, as you I'm sure know, you know, the psychiatric services that are available to anyone nationally are concerned.
Pretty thin.
Yeah.
So you're in Dickson County. Are these kind of services throughout Tennessee, sprinkled throughout different locations?
Yeah, back in the, our agency began over 40 years ago, and there were a number of agencies that began about that same time. Often they were church groups that began them, often advocacy groups like the ARC, which is a family-based organization. They began a number of those services, and most of them are still around in some fashion. I think there are a lot of new agencies that have come as well, and there are some agencies that operate statewide now also. So we have a real, right now, I think there are about 400 agencies with contracts with the state.
In Tennessee, 400?
Different kinds of services.
Different levels of service, yes.
There won't probably be that many in the future. I think with the ECF program there are 40 in the new services.
So, you know, this show is about helping our viewers understand the different needs, the different kinds of psychological or mental health issues, and this is a really big one. This is really critical, you know, intellectual disabilities. So I'm wondering if there's something that you would like to share with the viewers about, you know, what we need to know about people who have intellectual disabilities.
Well, they're people just like you and I.
Right.
They may have some additional support needs. they're not people who need to be made fun of or cast aside. You know, it's been said that society is only as good as it is to its most vulnerable citizens, and many times people with intellectual disabilities are our most vulnerable citizens. So I think, you know, if you've got a neighbor with a disability, go talk to them. You may find that there's a lot more there than you ever imagined. I think from families' points of view as well, back years ago, we had the medical community would say if you had a family member with a disability, you institutionalized them.
Yeah.
You didn't keep them at home.
Yeah.
They even said that families exhibited chronic grief.
Right.
Well, I had a son with a severe disability for 25 years, and you know, I don't think you experience any more grief than you do with any of your kids. And you know, at 11 o'clock on Friday night, I knew where Dylan was.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's, in some ways it was a lot less grief.
Yeah.
But I think the rewards that you see in raising a child with a disability are the same as with any other child. Sometimes you need a little additional help. And you know, you have to readjust your thinking. You know, they're not going to be president, maybe. But we've seen marvelous things with people with disabilities.
You know, that just brought a memory up for me. I have a German Shepherd that I'm teaching, hopefully, to help me in working with my clients. And we were taking a walk downtown, and there was a man, young man, in a wheelchair, and very limited in his physical ability, and also speech. It was difficult to understand him. And he yelled out, and I knew he was calling, and so there was a split second of deciding to stay on my walk or stop. And I think that's what you're saying. Let's honor them as people. So what I did is I went back to him, and he wanted to give a treat to my dog because he saw me give the treat to the dog. Well, my dog was more afraid of him than he was afraid of the dog because of the wheelchair. But those two connected in such an amazing way. It was a gift to be there in that moment and see this gentleman enjoy having that chance to give a treat to a dog, and my dog to lick him and thank him and not be afraid of a wheelchair. It was a beautiful moment. So I think that's what you're saying, you know, for us to honor them as people.
Yeah. The gifts they have sometimes are much greater than we would assume by seeing someone in a wheelchair.
And unexpected gifts sometimes, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So if you were to be able to reach out to anyone, it sounds like you're really strapped for money to pay employees, to help, to grow the program, to meet the needs,
It's always a concern.
Always. It never goes away.
It doesn't. That doesn't mean that, you know, we don't do a lot of fundraisers because the scope, the amount of money we spend in our services, it wouldn't make a lot of difference in what we could do.
Do you have people who donate their time?
We do.
Okay.
But in Medicaid-funded programs, everything's focused on the person. Sometimes you can't use volunteers the same way that you would in some other programs.
Right, right, right.
And so we don't use as many volunteers as we
right.
did in the past.
Right.
But we, in our early intervention program, we used to do more of that. But you know, we've seen people move from congregated services or congregate services, group homes, sheltered workshops, and so forth. That used to be the model. It was here in Tennessee 15 years ago. But now people are out in the community, so you know, people are going to see people more. They're going to see them in the schools as the kids. They're going to see them in the community. They're going to see them in the workplace. And when they go to a fast food restaurant, they're likely to see somebody with a disability working there, or the grocery store, or any number of places. We have people who have bought their own homes, and they're neighbors for folks.
That's wonderful.
It is, and you know, it's worked very well.
That's really wonderful. Well, the least that we can do would be what you suggested before, and that is to see them as people first. I think that's pretty important, and maybe an element of kindness. That doesn't cost very much, right?
Yeah, that's right. You know, I mentioned before advocacy, like with ARC, which is primarily a parent organization, but we see people advocating for themselves now.
Pretty incredible.
There's an organization that's been in Tennessee for some years called People First. It's a national organization, and you know, when we talk about people with disabilities, we talk about people with disabilities, not the disability. We don't talk about
people first.
That's right, and
yeah, people first.
yeah, so it makes sense, and you know. Some of the strongest advocates that we have are people with disabilities themselves. I and another staff member going to Washington later this spring, and she's going to bring her son who has Down syndrome with her, and it makes such a difference. You know, he'll be early learning to advocate for himself.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. It's pretty wonderful, and I know I speak for a lot of people when I say we surely are grateful for people like you running an organization like your organization. So needed. And you've educated me today. I'm sure you've educated some of our viewers on what it is that you do and about this population. So I want to be the first to say thank you, and if I can, shake your hand as well.
Well, we could probably talk several episodes on
I have a sense that we could. I have a sense that we could. It's so good to be here. This is an overlooked topic. It's an overlooked area. It's easy for us to miss, and we don't want to miss this. We want to see all as people first. So I'd like to say to all of our viewers that we are so glad to have you, and it is so wonderful to have you, Don Redden, and to be one of our guests and to help us better understand what it's like in working with and how we can be better at recognizing people with intellectual disabilities and or developmental disabilities and just offering kindness. So thank you for being with us today.